So today we are in Parsha Vayakhel, and this is about the big picture. Let's talk about the big picture. The 10th section of the book of Exodus opens as Moshe comes down from the mountain, from Mount Sinai, for the third and final time, and immediately assembles the Jewish people. And that's what the name of this Parsha is, Vayakhel, assembling. And Moshe informed them that that God had forgiven them for the sin of the golden calf and had instructed them to take action to build a tabernacle as a sign of forgiveness. Now, the last two parshas, we are in the last two parshas now of Exodus, of the book of Exodus, Vayakhel and Pekudei. They relate how Moshe and the people fulfilled God's instructions to build the tabernacle, to furnish it, and make the garments for the priests who would officiate in it. Now, in most years, these two parshas are read together. And in some years, they're read separately, and each has its own week. And in this particular year, we don't read them together, we read them separately. So this week we have the first of the two, Parshas Vayakhel. And the Rebbe often explained the significance of the title of the Torah portion. So even though at first glance the title might seem to simply be the first word or perhaps the first unique word in the portion, there's a deeper meaning. And not only is every Torah portion full of practical lessons, but the particular title is a lesson. So in this Parsha Vayakhel, we read that Moshe gathered the Jewish people and informed them. We're building a tabernacle. Here is a list of items that I need you all to contribute. So the people contributed so generously that Moshe had to instruct them to stop giving. So what does it mean, Vayakhel? What does that mean? It means to assemble, to gather. It embodies the concept of summarizing, tallying up a total, and basically seeing the big picture. That's what this parsha is about, seeing the big picture. Putting it together, seeing the big picture. The opening verse of Pekudei, the following parsha, reads, "These are the numbers of the tabernacle, which were counted at Moshe's command." So the next parsha has an exact accounting of the component parts that were used in the construction of the tabernacle. So what does Pekudei mean? Pekudei, which will be next week's parsha, means numbers, and it emphasizing counting each part, enumerating each item, and focusing on the details. So life is made of both, the big picture and the little picture. And Vayakhel gives the lesson that we must focus on the big picture. We must look at the entire project. We must look at the Jewish people as a whole. Pekudei, on the other hand, underscores the value of the individual part. Every item is important. Every Jew is important. So now, Vayakhel, and he assembled, is referring to how Moshe assembled the people when he came down from Mount Sinai to transmit God's command to build the tabernacle. Now, the word describes how Moshe gathered the people, so the people had to build the tabernacle as a collective whole, not as individuals. So we're looking at the collective here. The tabernacle's purpose was to enable God's presence to dwell among the entirety of the Jewish people. In order to fulfill this role, the wealth and the materials that people donate had to become community wealth, which meant that the people had to be assembled into a cohesive unit. Now, previously, the people had assembled for the construction of the golden calf. That was the greatest communal transgression in Jewish history. So a tikkun was needed. So they had gotten together to do something wrong. Now they had to connect together to do something right. So the tikkun, the repair was needed, because it was time to press the reset button. By building the tabernacle, a dwelling place for God's divine presence, together they would strengthen their relationship with the Almighty. So Moshe, how did he do this? He succeeded in imbuing the people with a unity of purpose. He transformed them into a united workforce of willing individuals. So there's the big picture, and there's putting us together to do our part. Now, obviously, individuals are involved in this. To do your part, you have to do your part, even though it's part of something for the whole. So by respecting and valuing each person's contribution, Moshe demonstrated that everyone mattered. And he impressed upon the people the greatness of their collective mission. And within their diversity was a greater cause that melded them together in a like-minded community. That's like saying, Mashiach is coming. We're all part of this big picture. What do I have to do to bring Mashiach? What is my part? In other words, not, yes, it's coming, it's in process, and the Rambam says you have to wait, but you also have to do your part to be part of making it happen. So we have our diversity. We each have good things that we do that makes the big picture a reality. And so within the diversity of the people was a greater cause that melded them together in a like-minded community. So we have to have that greater cause, and we have to do our part to be part of the greater cause. So diverse personalities can pool energies and resources for the common good. And dignity and a sense of belonging come from having a bigger picture. Otherwise, you just feel like, well, I don't know, what am I doing? I'm just all by myself doing something. But when we say what I'm doing is meaningful for the bigger picture, then we pay attention and we have this sense of belonging. We are told that God selected Bezalel and Aholiab, two men of very different lineages, to imbue with divine inspiration and the artistic ability to perform all kinds of highly skilled work, including weaving, woodworking, and the crafting of gold, silver, and copper vessels, making the parts of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. How could you do that? And it was people who were recently freed slaves would not have had refined skills to do this. But the people were given divine inspiration. So Bezalel and Oholiab were the two people who were given the divine inspiration to take charge of this larger picture. And even more noteworthy, and it also spoke about that some women were weaving, and they had the ability to weave goat's hair while the hair was still on the goats, and to deal with the sheep in ways that, how could you do such a thing? We have to understand, and we have to understand this for ourselves, that when God gives specific skills, that is coming with divine inspiration. And even more noteworthy is that while Bezalel was of the honored lineage from the tribe of Jehudah, and Oholiab was from the lowest of the tribes, from Dan, the Torah equates their talents. And this sends a message to the nation that it's not about your family background, it's not about your social status, and that's not what influences God. Each individual's contribution to the whole is equally meaningful as long as it's sincere. So what matters much more than who your parents or grandparents were is who you are. So we have to ask ourselves, that's a question for each of us. What are you doing to perpetuate Jewish life? Who will your grandchildren be, or what will your deeds be? Because it says that your deeds are like your children. So today, Jewish education is available to everyone. And with some effort, each of us can become knowledgeable in any area that we choose. So what are we doing that's making us a stronger part of the whole to make a difference in the world in terms of what we can do? Now, the tabernacle was a portable sanctuary built to accompany the children of Israel on their journey to the promised land. So the tabernacle was this was the sanctified space in which God's presence was manifest among his people. As long as God's presence is in our midst, Judaism and the Torah accompany us wherever we go. So when we're learning Torah right now, it's like having that sanctified space, because this is God's presence, this is God's Torah is with us. Now, each of us has our purpose as part of this big picture. It's very important to understand this. There's the big picture. God is present with us. But what is my job as part of the big picture? So each of us is part of that. And that's clear when we place our perspective on unity, dignity, and mutual respect. So we are part of the larger whole. Now, we should view every talent and skill that we have as being bestowed by God. Different people have different talents, and God is giving us our own specific talents. And what we do with our abilities is how we express appreciation for what we've been given. So we have to take those abilities, the specific talents and situations which guide us to know what we're good at, and that helps us to recognize our own purpose. So that's something we have to see. What am I good at? I remember I did not want to be a teacher, that is for sure. But at a certain point in my life, I graduated from college, I said, okay, I'm going to teach just for one semester, and then I'll just, save the money and go into what I really want to do. But within 2 or 3 weeks, it was very clear to me that I loved teaching, I loved my students, and that was what I was good at. And it was exactly what I didn't want to do. But when Hashem and my life brought me to a situation, it pointed out to me that had to do with my purpose. And then the Rebbe later on encouraged me to teach. I mean, I'm teaching my whole life, but I didn't expect to do that. And sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where we're doing something that was completely unexpected. And I didn't even know what that was, but it turns out that's what I'm good at. So that means that when God is showing us what we're good at, even though it might be very surprising to us, that helps us to recognize our purpose. So what is my purpose? So let's talk about the menorah for a moment. The menorah is to bring light into the world. And let's say my job is to make the oil for the menorah. Then that has to be my focus. If I think that I have to make the whole tabernacle all at once, then I don't do my job. Because I said, what kind of job? It's such a little job. Anybody could do that. Then you don't do it and nobody does it. Because if it's your job, then you have to say, I need to, yes, have the big picture that this is for the menorah, which is part of the tabernacle, but my part of it is to make the oil. And in doing my part, I am part of the unity of the big picture of making the whole tabernacle. So each of us has to focus on yes, here's the big picture. Mashiach is coming. What can I do to bring Mashiach? But I have to do my part. So I have to recognize my own purpose, my personal mission and life story, to which heavenly orchestrations have directed us. God brings us to people, opportunities, and situations that are ours to uplift. Say that you go to a wedding or an event and somebody that you never met before sits down next to you, and she doesn't seem to know anybody there, and you talk to her, and she talks to you. And soon what happens is you say, oh, part of the reason that I came to this wedding was to meet this lovely lady and have an important conversation. So we have to understand that God is bringing us to the places he's meaning to bring us, and that we have to look at them as opportunities. So we have to ask ourselves, how can I better my immediate surroundings? If Hashem has brought me to a place, what is it that I can do to make it better? How can I best address the needs and dreams of those whom divine providence has brought into my personal orbit and sphere of life? How can I make the difference to my family, friends, my community, my people? In other words, if God has brought me into this place in life, what can I do here to make a difference? So we have to recognize that what seems like small things, like my decision to teach for just a semester, turned out to change my life. Or a person that we sit down next to can make a difference in my life. So every person and situation that I affect also has a ripple effect. Every aspect is guided by God, and it's a precious part of a greater wholeness, with each contributing something crucial and indispensable to the larger story. So when we make a difference in somebody's life, even what seems to us like a small difference, there's this ripple effect that somebody says, you know what I learned? And says it to somebody else. No, really? That's exactly what I needed to know today. Thank you. That's so helpful. Then it becomes part of their life, and in their own way, they share it. So we think we're doing something small, but what we're actually doing is having a ripple effect. So what we have here is the intersection of divine providence and human initiative. God is bringing us to where he's bringing us. And there in that place, we have to do our part. So it helps, really helps to know, to recognize that everything is divine providence. Really helps to know that somebody sits next to me, that I meet somebody isn't just, oh, well, that happened, because we don't believe in happened. Everything is divine providence. So when we say, what can I do here? What does this mean? What is my opportunity here, and how can I take it? Then that's really our opportunity to connect with the purpose that God had in bringing us to this situation. Now, each component of the tabernacle had a unique holiness and fulfilled a unique function, but only when it became part of the tabernacle as a whole. So, for example, the candelabrum, the menorah, for example, functioned as the menorah and fulfilled its spiritual functions only when it was placed in the tabernacle together with all the other furnishings. So the menorah by itself is amazing, but for it to fulfill its purpose in the world, it needs to be together with the other furnishings inside the tabernacle. So we make it separately, but it is made to be together with all the other furnishings. So the Rambam does not consider the fashioning of the utensils of the Beis Hamikdash, the altars, the menorah, the table for the showbread, as mitzvahs in their own right. Instead, his conception is that these activities are all included in the mitzvah of constructing the Beis Hamikdash. So the mitzvah of constructing the Beis Hamikdash is one mitzvah. But each one of the elements has to be made to put it together. But this Parsha is talking about the big picture, that we have to have in mind that we're making what we're making and we're doing what we're doing as part of a bigger picture. So the particular elements are each considered important in their own right, but nevertheless, a new and more encompassing significance is generated when they come together to form the whole. And we have this with friendships or with raising children. It's sometimes you feel like, okay, my job is to make sure that these children get some breakfast before they go to school. And it feels like, okay, that's what I have to do right now, but there's so many things I have to do. But we have to say, the big picture is to have healthy children who grow up. And they're not going to grow up well if they don't have breakfast. And maybe the same goes for us, that we have to eat properly so that we also grow in healthy ways and are able to go forward. So it's not just that we're eating for the purpose of eating, we're eating for the purpose of health. So when we take care of each piece of what we're doing as part of a bigger picture, everything changes. And the whole big picture is to serve God in a healthy way, to do our part to bring Mashiach, to be part of the entire Jewish people, to make a difference through doing our part. So the Beis Hamikdash is composed of all these different elements, the courtyard, the sanctuary, the Holy of Holies. But until the Beis Hamikdash as a whole was completed, none of these particular elements had any holiness attached to them. Once the Beit HaMikdash was sanctified, however, each of these particular elements was given a degree of holiness on its own, in addition to the holiness of the Beit HaMikdash as a whole. So you do your part, and you say, okay, I have to give breakfast to the children. I have to eat breakfast myself. And it seems like that's something, okay, that's what I need to do. But it turns out to be, it seems like something small, but it turns out to be part of having a good, meaningful, functioning day. And that day is part of having a good, meaning, functional week and life. So these are things that seem small, but once we actually get into them, we realize they're part of something bigger. So the lessons in the name of Parsha Vayakhel are, first of all, every Jew is part of the whole Jewish people, a collective reality necessary for God's purposes on earth to be fulfilled. So we are all, each of us is an individual, but we're part of the whole Jewish people. We have to know that. And this is part of what God is accomplishing through our people. Now, no Jew is too high or too low on the ladder of spiritual status to work together with every other Jew, since they're all part of the same collective whole. And we saw this with Bezalel and Oholiav. Ordinarily, they lived in different tribes, they lived in different situations, but because the tribes traveled together individually. But when it came to doing the work, Hashem chose this one and that one and gave them each divine inspiration, and they worked together. So we all work together, each doing our individual part, even though we might not see how we're working with somebody else, but we are part of this whole. Second, every Jew is essential to the community, just as every detail of the tabernacle was essential to its operation. Sometimes we see that making a space shuttle, sometimes one screw makes a very big difference. Rabbi Gordon told a story. It's just a parable that there was a big machine that made a big difference in a ship, but something wasn't working properly. So this person went and he found the problem. It was in a screw. So he put the right screw in, turned the screw properly, and now everything worked. And then he sent a bill for $10,000. Now, this took a very short time. So they said, $10,000? So he said, yes. $1 was for turning the screw, and the other $9,999 was for knowing which screw to turn. So it's very true that sometimes we think we're doing something small, but in the smartest person's house, sometimes you need to get a plumber to do some work with a little screw, but he is educated in that area. So what he does is necessary for what you need to get done. So in that sense, we need to know that we are all part of this whole. So, and we also have to understand that even though each of our individual, work is done, it doesn't assert itself until we identify with the Jewish people as a whole. So when we say that plumber, it's actually my friend, when he comes and does something that I need, that's part of my big picture. And when I have done something that he needed, actually, I was part of his big picture. So we need to know we're all part of something. And why are we each doing what we're doing? Because we're part of something much bigger. So just as the individual components of the tabernacle did not begin to function until the entire edifice was erected, we need to know that that's who we are. We're part of putting it all together. Even though God is the one that runs everything, God is the one that gives us our talents, God is the one that puts us together with each other. And so this is what makes it all work. And this Parsha also teaches us that despite our own shortcomings and the imperfect nature of the reality we live in, we should never feel too inadequate to fulfill God's will. We're all here to do our part. If we don't know a lot, we can learn more. If we are doing part of the picture, but we feel there's more we can do, then we need to do the part that we can do. It was the real world tabernacle that the people built. Moshe had the vision of the abstract ideal tabernacle when he was on Mount Sinai. He saw that tabernacle that God would dwell in, but he brought it down so that we should really bring it down into reality. So if we act with warmth and sincerity and enthusiasm, God makes it work and helps us to do what we're here to do, and then dwells in the tabernacle we build him out of our lives. Now, each of us has our own way of growing, and it's very important for us to know that God is part of it, because, this is also part of this Parsha in terms of talking about Shabbos, which I'm not going to do right now, but we need to know that God is helping us and God is part of it. You never know who is. There was a story about a person who was a shliach of Chabad, somebody who was a teacher, and the Rebbe sent him to do his work. I think it was a woman, actually. And she prepared for a large talk. She had a big room with many seats, and then there was a snowstorm. And one person came. And so she wrote into the Rebbe and she said she felt like a complete failure. She had all the food, she had all the chairs, she had a talk that was ready and prepared, and one person came. And the Rebbe wrote back to her, sometimes you can have many people, hundreds of people in a room that you give a speech to, and one person is affected. One person is the one who really gets your message and their life changes. And he could say, well, perhaps that's the person who came. So he was saying, you didn't fail. Your job wasn't a waste. The right person came who needed to hear what you had to say. And there's a lot of stories about that. There was a story about the Rebbe, with just telling it very quickly. The Rebbe told somebody wrote to the Rebbe that he's going to this in this place, and he's going to be giving a series of talks there. And the Rebbe said, when you go there, tell a story, tell this particular story. And the Rebbe went there. And what wound up happening was that the story he told was about somebody, a tzaddik who had lived in the past, a very interesting story. But the person who went to hear it was not raised as a Jew. And only recently in his life, he had been told that his mother was Jewish, but because of the Holocaust, she hid, and therefore she didn't raise her children Jewish. But she said, but there's one interesting thing you should know about your ancestor. And she told him this story. And the Rebbe said, tell this story when you go there. And so this person came up afterwards and said, could you tell me the story again? So the person told him the story again. So he said, I'd like to hear it one more time with the details. And he told it again. And then the person found him in his hotel room and said, I just need to hear that story one more time. A few years later, that person, the rabbi who told the story, was at the kotel. And there was a man with a beard, dressed, a religious person. And he came up to this rabbi and said, do you remember me? He said, no. He said, I'm the person that asked you to retell the story. And he said that he had no context for being a Jew. He wasn't raised like that. But when his mother said this was his ancestor, suddenly he started to have context for, this is where I come from. This is who I really am. And he went to Israel and he started to learn, and he became an appropriate descendant for this person. So, the Rebbe knew that somebody would come for whom this story was meaningful. So he said, tell the story. Spoken about a Moshe in every generation. And sometimes, I don't know why I told this story. I had absolutely no intention to tell this story. But sometimes by divine providence, God gives us some kind of connection to something, and it makes a difference to someone. So this is part of our growing and part of the divine providence that God gives us. So sometimes we don't know how to go forward, or we might feel like we're failures because we feel like we're just doing part of the job. What was so important? Maybe not so many people came. What did I do that was so important? But you never know why God placed you there and what the purpose was to what you did. So we need to recognize that our part is also essential to the larger picture. What happens when you have a third grade teacher and she could feel like a failure? Because at the end of the year, there's so much more for her students, her class to learn, and she can't continue to teach them. She just is going to get another group of third graders. But the skills she teaches and the development she brings her students in so many ways are essential to their process, which takes years. So often people remember that they remember one teacher as having made a big difference in their lives. But in any case, when she does her job, She builds their development and is a major part of their education. She's not doing the whole thing. She's doing her part as part of the whole thing. So on a personal level, we may each have our own Vayakhel experience when we decide to begin our own large project, a project that we know is right for us to do. And at the beginning, it seems overwhelming to the point that we might not begin at all. On the other hand, we can commit to doing one part every day. What can I do every day? The project needs to be done, but the only way we can finish a large project is to begin. How do you complete a massive project? By taking the first step. And then by taking it one step at a time after that. And with this approach, thank God, we can successfully complete an amazing project, a project which we know will make a difference. So instead of putting it off, we could say, I'm going to work with this part today. And then I'm going to complete this part. And then I'll go on to another part. And with this approach, we can do it. And that's Vayakhel, to focus on the big picture and move forward one day at a time, one act at a time, one step at a time, because we're all part of the larger picture that God intends for the world. The large picture began when God decided to make a world to facilitate the picture he already desired. God desired something, and then God had a vision of what it would be, what the world would be. And it's very interesting that he had a vision of us as a whole and of each of us. It's very, very interesting that when we look at someone, how are we looking at them? Are we looking at them as who they really are? Or are we looking at them in a very superficial way? When we look at people who we really like, who they really are, we bring that out in them. And that is essential. And for some people, being seen once by somebody in a real way can change their lives. So this picture that God desires is being built through individuals and generations. It's being continued through individual choices in the moment and in taking whatever steps we can, and recognizing that each of us is part of that big picture is what encourages us to do our own part. When we do one thing, it seems small, but we know I need to show up for this, and who knows what difference this is going to make, but I know I need to have it. I need to be part of it. The third and final temple will be rebuilt, and each of us is part of the process. Even though the choices and actions that we do today seem small, that is part of the building, making the choices that build the builder picture today and every day. So it's up to us to begin, but in actuality, we begin again and again and again, and we begin and we continue, and we contribute to building a dwelling place for God. The world is in the process of becoming a place of light and goodness, with unity and harmony among us, and this unity will embrace all existence. This is being accomplished through all the work of all of those who God has brought into the world, in all the generations, into the ongoing process that we're all part of. So may we do what we're here to do with joy and recognize that we're part of the big picture and just keep moving forward, one step at a time, one day at a time, one process at a time. So may we all be blessed to do what we're here to do, and may we see the Beis Hamikdash, the third Beis Hamikdash, rebuilt now in our time.